Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a kind of another one of these little follow-up episodes here, discussing kind of changes that happen in Reborn that seem simple on paper, but were actually way more complicated back in the day. So to that end, let's go ahead and talk about changes to the leveling system. So let's go ahead and head down to a slightly more complete than using a level 1 in chapter 2 file, and take a quick peek here. So this on paper seems like it should be a relatively simple thing. You essentially you go over to a unit, they get experience, they level up, all of that kind of thing, and generally speaking, as those units get stronger, they get more levels, and those levels give them more stats, and yada yada yada. Those levels also give them more skills. But this might leave a few questions as to why certain UI elements are there, why certain things kind of behave one way or another. So to that end, let's take a quick peek. So first of all, you might notice that we've had this particular menu in Reborn since launch, obviously, but in its particular case, there's kind of an interesting quirk in that there's a kind of a bunch of interesting bits and pieces to this one that don't necessarily seem to make sense at first glance. Like, why would you ever need a kind of breakdown unit count over how many you have of each individual type of unit? Like, it's cool that it's here, but why would somebody make a whole UI element for this? Additionally, why can you go to each one and just kind of swap around their genders for a little bit, like just kind of for funsies? Like, it's a cool visual thing, but why is it here, right? Okie doke, so let's take a look at how this used to look in the past here. So, there's going to be the PSP version, obviously. Now, the thing was, back in this version, you might have potentially heard this, that, or the other about its leveling system. It was weird, to say the least. Basically, what they wanted to do was sort of kind of go layer upon layer of different bits of kind of depth and also not really actually depth when it came to abstracting a bunch of things for this game. So, for example, an individual unit was not exactly its level. You might notice right here we have a bunch of units, a bunch of different classes, and the classes themselves are leveled individually. So effectively, the way that it broke down was that a unit would have an individual kind of stat pile, and it would just be a score from 1 to 100, and then their actual level would be their class level, and that's just something that they sort of slipped into. It was just essentially their uniform, and now suddenly that uniform made them way stronger or way weaker or whatever else. Now, the weird part about this was that it was meant to be trying to it was trying to sort of solve a problem from back in SNES. So back in the SNES version, when a unit died, they effectively just were dead on the spot. Their health hit 0, they were dead for good. Thing was, though, they tried to solve it in a lot of different ways at once. And this is actually one of those things that made the PSP version so weird, because every time that you look at it, it's like, okay, here's one problem, and here's like 5 different ways we tried to fix it at once, and oftentimes those ways tended to get in each other's way. So, for example, that problem that we talked about units dying, the main issue people had was that oftentimes players would not use the recruit mechanic, which was meant to get units back in your team. So they did several different things. For one thing, they made the recruit mechanic a bit more visible, and they made it to the point where you could basically get up to 100% recruit odds. Second layer, they made it so that there's a bleed out timer, just like Final Fantasy Tactics, when a unit goes down. Third layer was they gave them lives. So each unit had 3 lives. Fourth layer, they brought back the crystal mechanic from FFT, but essentially you would just be able to pay 1 silver coin and you would just have a dead body in your inventory. And then fifth layer was this level up mechanic, which arguably even worked against itself in this case. Because what they were going for was that, okay, you've trained up these units up to this level, you get a fresh recruit, and hey, look, all of a sudden, level 37 Berserker, they're already good to go. But the problem was, they were still a fresh-faced recruit. Their skills were not necessarily there. You could transfer old skills from older units into this unit, but potentially they might not mesh with the thing that you were trying to do, or potentially they might have, maybe you had some other build in mind or something. So again, it was weird because you transferred everything from the previous guy aside from accumulated experience towards another skill rank. So like if they hit rank 4, they're good to go. If they were at rank 3 and they were at 99.5%, they're just at rank 3 with 0% now. Okay, so effectively, the weirdness of the system was that it put this unit into this new level, but they didn't get any of the stat level ups in order to get there. So effectively, you were losing kind of potential on that character in the long run in order to make them somewhat barely more functional right now. but also, again, like, in the long run, you're not really making up for that in any other substantial way aside from turning them into some other class. So carrying over the skills that the other guy had in order to switch them to another class to get those stats back up, which again in itself was not necessarily explained either, would just kind of create like several different directions of weird ideas clashing against each other. So effectively what they wanted here in some regards was for somebody to always stay as the same class, but at the same time it was more optimal for them to absolutely not do that ever. But then also there wasn't enough carryover because several of these classes had more kind of restrictions in terms of their equipment. So in a lot of cases, their actual career path would kind of be hampered by itself constantly. So like if you wanted a sword master, right? And let's say you built them up for stats up until they got to the point of being a swordmaster, they might do a bit better, but they are the only class that uses the two-handed katana that isn't the lord. Like literally the only one. Let's say you wanted one-handed katanas and things like that. The only guy that's going to be using that is going to be the ninja. Let's say you wanted Fusils. Well, funnily enough, Fusiliers actually did get an advantage of all things. All the other skills more or less go up at the same rate, but the Fusilier, they train about twice as fast. Because, okay, they get the one exception, I guess, because they show up in Chapter 4. But what about other characters that show up in Chapter 4, like the Songstress? Too bad, they're training at the normal rate. It's weird to have these oddly specific cases where they noticed one problem and then just totally missed it in a completely other situation. But this is one of many things that can be pointed at in the PSP version that's like, yeah, look, here's a cool idea on paper, and then they didn't really, like, completely flesh it out until Reborn happened. Because, frankly, the way the Reborn handles it of just individual levels, and then that is just your stats and you're done, that's fine. That's good. That causes a case where you don't need the lives mechanic, units die, but they already have all of their skills that they're going to need. And we'll actually get over to the quote-unquote missing cross-classing here in a minute. But effectively, this means that there isn't any weirdness with stats. The levels are far more understandable. It's just one number. But it did lead to some situations where, like right here, it was hard to explain why there were additional menus in the PSP version that sometimes folks would mistake for additional depth. Like, hey, you know, you can go and change what everybody looks like, and sometimes there's a different racial version, though I don't think I recruited any lizards or orcs or anything in this version. It's especially funny why there's even an option for lizards or orcs in this menu when you do have one recruited, because it literally is just like, here's a lizard or an orc. It doesn't actually change anything. Anyway, so the weird part about this is that, yeah, they had a slight defense addition there, kind of attack addition there, but this, again, like, this is a menu no one actually regularly went to. But again, it's one of many things that was basically removed for the purpose of making more sense in Reborn. But this is actually something that you get to see utilized a decent bit for kind of interesting purposes in the One Vision overhaul. Wherein, for example, if you take a look at the Rune Fencer, in that case there would be a Spellblade, and their cast stones down there would be replaced with a throw item. So it's funny how in that version they managed to actually get some use out of this particular menu, but in the original PSP version where it was originally added, there was basically no reason to go here aside from it's just here. Just kind of a neat little oddity here. Now, another thing I want to point out here is as far as cross-classing is concerned. So this is one that I mentioned in some longer videos before. This oftentimes gets missed, but with a new batch of folks coming in to Tactics Ogre Reborn here, we get a new batch of folks bitching about the old days that never existed. So, okay, cross-classing. Let's take a look at this. What did you actually cross-class between your units? Passives. So basically, this meant that up to a certain rank of every passive was going to be available to classes in different degrees. Yes, these were capped off. You couldn't just bring them around at all times. If a class was meant to be more squishy, you know, it had more health or whatnot, but there was little to no logic behind a lot of these. So, for example, let's say Field Alchemy, right? That's something that everybody can use. Fantastic. This means that everyone can use all items. And basically, you're stuck with a very random selection of items that you can use until you get this. I mean, until you have Field Alchemy 2 or 3, realistically, outside of using tarot cards, you're not really using a whole lot of items on that character. When it comes to things like Constitution, let's go ahead and see if we can piece together the logic here. Okay, the frontline fighter here in the terms of the Spellblade, yeah, clearly they're not going to have maxed out health. The Archer certainly will. Sure, makes sense to me. Oh, the Priest, yes, clearly needs maxed out health. And the songstress. The songstress gets more health than, for example, the Fusilier or the patriarch. Apparently, kind of random, but sure, let's go with it. Or, for example, strengthen 4. This actually is one of those things that basically got replaced by the cards here, but it was a case where you could carry over a strengthen bonus, and this. Again, it's not exactly the same because it happens at a different phase there of the calculation or whatnot, but as far as strengthen is concerned, it is functionally speaking the same idea as the physical up cards in Reborn. So in that one, effectively you would go and collect the cards, like let's say you break open a crate, you get a strength up, and then from there, you just kind of carry that over. If you try to carry more than 4, you end up replacing your original cards, right? So in this case, you would just be able to carry this as one of your slots in this version. Now, what you might notice here is if we take a look at the UI, we'll see that some units have an X, some units have a circle, and some units are grayed out. So the grayed out ones just would not be able to use this because, clearly a rogue needs to be able to hit harder than the Fusilier that has a gun. But all right, sure, whatever. So that's all well and good, but you'll notice that the ones that can't learn it can still carry this over. This is basically all that cross-classing was used for. That if you have a higher rank than is technically allowed to be learned by your class, or you end up learning it early, then you can carry it over to other classes. And mostly this was just used for breaking the game and such. So for example, right now he has Strength in 4 because he got Dragoon up to 50 here, right? I believe in this particular case, he actually learned it as Berserker back in the 30s. That was one of the main reasons you'd power level a Berserker. So in his particular case, if he were to, for example, switch over to Knight real quick, I believe the Knight was one of the ones that was allowed to use Strength in 4. So yeah, so effectively now he is able to switch over to that, and now he's essentially got permanent, roughly 60% extra damage on top of all of his attacks. He just gets to keep that. Anyways, continuing on here, augments. So augments and attenuations were something that everybody got to use. However, even when you used both augments and attenuations, they would not really give you the same effect as just having that element in Tor. So like in this case, it would give you an attack bonus, it would give you a defense bonus, but it's basically a flat thing. It's like if you're using a dark attack, you just get that bonus, and if you are hit by dark stuff and you have the attenuate version of the skill on, then you will resist that much. But there are no inherent weaknesses in this version. There were some that were introduced in the One Vision mod, but as far as its default state here, there really weren't any notable weaknesses. So ultimately, everything just kind of came down to which color would you prefer. There were some differences in terms of the buffs and debuffs and stuff like that, but realistically, you knew what you were going for ahead of time, so you just sort of picked one. Or if you were indecisive, you went dark. All right, parry and deflect. So this is one of those ones, I believe I actually might have mentioned this in the last video. Like, this is one of those ones that's kind of hilarious in terms of, like, why was it capped off at just rank 3? It's not fair, I could have just ranked this up to some insane degree back in the day. And fact was that, I mean, kind of, but it was really annoying to do. So the way that parry and deflect work in this one, you'll notice I don't have parry on here, was that you had to pick one. So back in the day, you had to pick a parry or a deflect, and whichever one happened to hit you is the one that you're hoping to kind of roll against there. The funny part was that if you took the two side by side, you'd find yourself in a weird position where oftentimes you may not necessarily have the thing that you were hoping to have actually triggering. Like, for example, in the case of deflect here, even though the longbows in this game were kind of freakishly strong, despite the fact that this was a solo run, and was well over 100 hours into the solo run, you'll notice deflect is at rank 3 out of a possible of rank 8, technically rank 8 plus 4. So why is it so low? Because this only rolls when So this basically means that if, for example, you have sidestep or you just have really high evasion or something, there's a lot of cases where deflect just doesn't have a chance to train itself. So you can literally prevent your defensive skills from working by just being too defensive. so that's kind of fun. But anyways, the main idea that I'm trying to get across here is that most of the stuff that's actually cross-classable to any degree is the really boring stuff. Like, usually when somebody would figure, oh, it's cross-classing, I can bring over whatever, you would assume from stuff left in Steam reviews and whatever, there would be something like, oh, I could move Phalanx over to somebody else. You can't do that. Oh, I can, I can use Recruit on anybody. That one you can. Using something like Recruit or Tame, that one is actually freely available. Something like Field Alchemy is freely available. Most of the other ones that are actually interesting aren't. Just kind of so you're aware there. Most of it was just you learned a thing slightly early. Good for you. Anyway. Alright, so actually next little thing here, there was one interaction that they did take away, that was actually the interaction of Recruit and Anatomy, which basically just meant if you used Recruit and Anatomy at the same time, those two skills would stack on top of another, which meant that your Recruit odds were really, really high. So you could very easily find yourself in a position where you had like 80 to 100% Recruit odds on a unit that was just hit once. For obvious reasons, that's more than a little bit broken. It is what it is. You can actually technically still do this in Tor. So to that end, let's go ahead and take a quick look back at how Tor actually handled these things as opposed to how they're kind of portrayed, as it were. Okay, so let's assume that somebody was looking at Tor here, and oftentimes the argument that you would see was, okay, you can't go and cross-class stuff into these units. So let's say in this particular case we wanted to go and transfer, let's say, something like the ability to recruit a different type of unit, as well as give, let's say, something like Meditate over to a Knight or something along those lines, right? So in this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to take Mr. Paul over here, and we're going to give him an Ogre Blade. So this is a unique weapon that is available in all versions of the game, but it's always served a different purpose. Like back in PSP, technically, it had the same ability that it does here, kind of, in which it goes and takes somebody's body, but there's very little reason to do so. Because, frankly, any unit that you get is usually going to be way worse than what you already have. So what they did in this version was that it actually merges the existing skills, whatever they happen to be, of the current unit with this other unit. So effectively this means that you can kind of sort of custom create a class in a way, because this also applies in cases where, for example, there is a... Oh, that's actually possibly a bit louder than I was intending. But this creates a situation where you might be potentially doing this with a unit that has a transformation. So that's actually what we're going to take advantage of right here, where we're going to go ahead and give a guy a transformation item here in order to let him use the sword, but still technically have him be as a different class. So effectively what this would mean is that we would be able to, let's say, combine the skills of a Lich together with that of a Knight, right? So that could be a potentially very useful combination, but it allows for far more cross-classing than was ever possible in the original. Like, it's not even remotely close in terms of the number of combinations that you could potentially do. Like, maybe you wanted to have Terror Knight skills over on, over on a regular Knight, or let's say you wanted to have a cleric with... cleric with angel songs or something. There's a lot of new combinations that are possible, because again, remember, the old passives are just kind of just built into the system here. So again, if you ever heard anybody trying to claim that nonsense, it's bogus. It's not a thing. It's people trying to remember something that didn't exist. And I just want to point out, it's not necessarily always their fault. It's a case where the original was so vastly misunderstood all the frickin' time, that even when playing it, oftentimes there's this kind of mentality of, oh man, there's this cool mechanic, they totally would have removed it in the later versions because something, I clearly need to go and try this out right now, and then you go and try it, and it's like, it ends up having some really weird tedium attached to it, right? And so this would happen, for example, in cases where, like, I used to go and boot up the original PSP version back in the day, and be like, oh man, I can't wait to go try this skirmisher build kind of situation, and oftentimes they just would not have the juice to really make anything work without double the training time. Or actually, I just noticed I forgot to use his item. That probably would have helped a decent bit, huh? In fact, actually, let's go ahead and... No, we're actually going to go ahead and hope that... that Canopus doesn't just end the fight here, because he very well might. Also, the puppies say hi in the background. They're apparently very excited right now. Anyway, so yeah, this... I mean, the PSP version was rife with that kind of stuff. It was pretty much ever friggin' present. And it's again, it was a case of kind of overambition there. That there was a lot of stuff that they were trying to do at once. It didn't always land like you'd kind of hope there, so It happens. It's fine. But still, okay, so there we go. So now we picked up this dude. I'm just going to go ahead and body snatch right into them there, and now we have a new guy, and our old guy is basically dead. Now, what's funny is that they actually corrected one other minor issue here, because in previous versions, whenever you use the Ogre Blade up, the original would try to keep it, and it was a point of frustration for a lot of players, because they're like, clearly the guy's still holding on to it. Why can't I just steal it back? Why can't I recruit them back? Why can't I do anything with this interaction? And so this time around, they're like, okay, look, the thing disintegrates on use, and like just chill out with the worrying about that. Anyway, so let's go ahead and take a look at that unit now and see what abomination we've created here. So you'll notice that he leveled up from scratch, even though he was technically at max level. And so in this particular case, we take a look at wherever on Earth this guy wound up in the pile. He should be somewhere in the middle here. I think that's him right there, isn't it? Yep. So you'll see his stats for intelligence and mind are freakishly high because he retained the mind of the original, but he is secretly this guy. So instead, let's say we wanted to create a Dragoon that simply does not stop. We wanted to make a Dragoon that could constantly upkeep all of his crazy killing abilities. And so in this particular case, we'll go ahead and give him something like Salvation so that he can go ahead and max out his MP right from the very start of the fight. We'll go ahead and keep him with Cudgels because why not? It's funny. We'll go ahead and give him Magic Reflection there. We'll go ahead and throw on a, let's say he's going to go fight a dragon or something. And so now, let's go ahead and see what kind of cudgels we got on hand for him. Realistically, you probably shouldn't be using a combat cudgel build for something like this, but it's a funny thing that you can do. And yeah, so there we go. Now we got a Dragoon with all kinds of extra skills on him, and it was just simply that easy. And if we wanted to go get more of that particular item, we have shortcuts to go down there. It would probably take like 20 minutes to go get another one, which compared with the roughly, depending on what way you want to count it, back in the day, it could have it could have been potentially dozens of hours to potentially go down and get yourself another Ogre Blade, because one of the other things that they had fixed is that you were not able to use your shortcuts under a lot of very oddly specific circumstances. So in this particular case, we've seen an improvement to the readability of the unit itself. Everyone's just their level. They can essentially double up on their level if they, they reincarnate themselves in some way, as we've seen here. We don't have to worry about having specific skills for unlocking specific items. Units are able to use stuff that they never could have used before. Like, for example, can you use recruit skills on other units? Yeah, you absolutely can. It just comes to transferring stuff around. And essentially this means that the system is far more readable, far more open, and far more flexible in terms of the stuff that it can do. Because remember that these are all skills that potentially would have required individual actions to go and trigger at one time, and now they're able to use all of this at one time. Right? And potentially, let's say we have a Salvation. Do we want a reflection on him? Probably not. I mean, it's a reflection. It's fine. It's situationally very useful. But let's say suddenly those Bane abilities now have a lot more use in terms of, let's say, letting them improve their damage output and magic output and whatever else at the same time, while also allowing them to, let's say, keep the other one free for something like Slayer here. So Beast Bane is honestly good enough. Dragon Slayer is probably going to be a bit more useful for specific circumstances. And apparently I've just developed a stutter today. Amazing. Anyhow, so yeah, that's why I love the system. Like, for all of the kind of whinging that happens in the reviews every now and then, while the system on paper looks like it had, kind of reduced the numbers or been Skyrimified, so to speak, effectively what this creates is, again, a far more readable, far more flexible, and just far smoother system. At no point when going through Tor, I don't even know how many times at this point, like literally across 3 different consoles, at no point has it been like, I want to build this one weirdly specific idea. Oh wait, hold on, here's like a whole checklist of random nonsense to go through in order to get there. Like, yeah, there's going to be some specific recruitment requirements or whatever else that have always been there, but I mean stuff like, oh, you have to switch over to this class to go pick up this one skill slightly early so that it's a little bit faster for raising this other skill. You got to grind up these 3 other skills. Like, it's just there. You have your skills right away. They're going to all work at the same time, potentially. You've still got your old action abilities for your more kind of pronounced actions, as it were. It's a great system. Anyway, yeah, overall, solid improvements across the board as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, we have way more cross-class skills and skill activations than there ever were in any previous version. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. All right, that's about that. You'll have yourselves a good one. Take care.